Welcome to episode 24 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's November 24, 1956, at the Olympic Games in Melbourne. The Olympic Park Stadium is packed, the late spring Australian air is warm, and the tournament's opening football match has this very specific Cold War flavor. On one side, the Soviet Union, officially amateur, but in reality a squad of full-time state-backed footballers, including the man many already called the best goalkeeper in the world, Lev Yashin, and a 19-year-old forward some would later nickname the Soviet Pele, Eduard Streltsov. On the other, a united team of Germany, East and West in one Olympic entry, but anything but united behind the scenes. The DFB has dragged its feet on cooperation. The compromise squad is drawn largely from West German amateurs, and only one player has ever been capped by the full national team, and only once. Defending Olympic champions Hungary are nowhere to be seen. Their golden generation has been broken up, on the pitch and then on the streets of Budapest, and they will not defend their title in Melbourne. The USSR are favourites. Germans are supposed to be outgunned, but the match itself is closer and stranger than anyone expects. To understand why this match matters, it helps to rewind the Olympic football tape. From the 1930s, after the World Cup was introduced, and until the 1950s, Olympic football is a strange half-cousin of the real thing. The best players in Europe and South America increasingly play professional club football, which makes them ineligible for the Games under strict amateur rules. Uruguay's great amateur sides dominated in 1924 and 28, but by the post-war era, the World Cup is where the true elites gather. Then the Eastern Bloc spots the loophole. In countries like the Soviet Union, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and East Germany, footballers are on papers amateurs, but they're soldiers, railway workers, policemen, students, paid by the state, yes, but in reality, they train full-time, live in clubhousing, and enjoy something very close to professional status. On a World Cup field, the West can put their pros against these state amateurs. At the Olympics, they can't. England, West Germany, Italy, and others have to scrape together true amateur sides, part-timers, and lower division players to comply with the rules. From the early 1950s onward, the pattern is clear. Hungary win gold in Helsinki in 1952 with their mighty Magyars. The Soviets win gold in Melbourne in 1956, then in Yugoslavia, Hungary again, Poland, East Germany, an entire generation in which the Olympic podium belongs to the state amateurs of the Eastern Bloc. Melbourne 1956 is the moment that curve really starts, and its first chapter is the Soviet Union versus Germany on this day in 1956. The German side that walks out in Melbourne is officially the Fußball team of a united team of Germany. That's the compromise the IOC has imposed. West Germany and the GDR must march together, share a flag, share an anthem, and in theory, share squads. In practice, football can't quite keep up. Throughout the early 1950s, East and West argue about who controls selection, who coaches, where training camps are held. For Melbourne, the West German DFB pushes hard for its own amateur team to represent the whole. The East German Federation, however, bogged down in its own politics and reluctant to send players under what it sees as West German control and, frankly, Western influence, drags its feet and ultimately doesn't contribute anyone. So when the united German football team lines up to face the Soviets on this day in 1956, the shirt and the Olympic entry say Germany, but the squad is essentially a West German amateur select side in all but name. Only one player in the squad, Rudi Hoffmann of Karlsruhe, has ever been capped by the full West German national team, and that was a single friendly appearance the previous year. Across from them stand the Soviets. Coached by Gavril Kakhalin, the USSR bring a group drawn largely from the Moscow clubs, Spartak, Dynamo, and CSKA. They've already made an impression at 1952 Olympics, but this is their first real crack at gold. But let's be clear, this isn't some thrown-together student 11. Just over 2 months earlier, on September 15, 1956, the USSR have gone to Hanover and beaten the full West German national team, reigning world champions, 2-1 in a prestige friendly. And look at that spine of the 1956 side. Lev Yashin, Dynamo Moscow's goalkeeper, already nicknamed the Black Spider and widely regarded even then as the best keeper in the world. Valentin Ivanov, a clever forward who will later finish top scorer at Euro 1960. And then Eduard Streltsov, Torpedo Moscow's teenage star, all power and vision, the player later often compared to Pelé for his mix of strength and grace. This is a seasoned international side dressed up as an amateur Olympic team. They arrive in Melbourne as strong favourites, not just for this match, but for the whole tournament. And they're very aware that every result is read as proof of a system's superiority. So when you strip away the United Germany label, what you have is effectively this. a Soviet 11 that has just beaten West Germany's professional first team in Hanover, an Olympic German 11 made up of domestic amateurs for whom this is the biggest stage they will ever see. On paper, it should be a mismatch. The game itself has an almost understated build-up. Attendance is modest. The opening rounds of Olympic football rarely draw huge crowds in this era, but everyone in the ground understands the symbolism. Soviet Union versus Germany, just over a decade since the atrocities at Stalingrad and the fall of Berlin, less than a month after tanks in Budapest. From the start, the USSR looked more polished. Neto and Ivanov keep the ball, the fullbacks overlap, and Yashin, in dark kit, is a reassuring figure behind a high defensive line. Midway through the first half, the favorites make their superiority tell. In the 23rd minute, the move that leads to the opener starts down the flank. A quick exchange down the right, a driven cross into the box, and Anatoly Isayev goes across his marker to turn the ball home. 1-0 to the Soviet Union. It's exact what the script demands. State amateurs 1, true amateurs 0. The rest of the half is largely red. Soviet attacks come in waves. Germany are pinned back, but survive thanks to last-ditch defending and a couple of wayward Soviet finishes. Yashin has almost nothing to do beyond sweeping behind his backline. After the break, though, the game does not turn into a rout. The Germans grow into it. They press higher, sneak a few efforts from distance, and begin to test the Soviet defense. As the clock ticks past the hour, reports talk about the Soviets looking disjointed, as if the early lead has made them sloppy. A British journalist from The Scotsman will later grumble that the Soviets need to improve their game if they are to justify their status as favorites, and notes that the Germans come close to an equalizer late on, only to be denied by Yashin. The same report sniffs that the whole tournament feels like a joke, with Soviet gold a foregone conclusion, given their quasi-professional status. That's how obvious the structural gap looks to outside observers, and how underwhelming this first showing feels. The final minutes bring both the class gap and the tension into sharp focus. With about 5 minutes to go, the USSR spring a counter. Germany pushing for that equalizer, a caught high. The ball is worked quickly through the midfield to Eduard Streltsov. He drives at the retreating defense, glides past one challenge and finishes low into the corner. Somewhere around the 86th minute, it's now 2-0. It looks done, but the unified Germans refuse to roll over. Almost straight from the restart, they throw men forward. A cross comes in, and Jürgen Habich gets his head to it and beats Yashin 2-1. As the match moves into the last minute, suddenly the upset that seemed impossible becomes a flicker of possibility. There's just enough time for one more German surge. They push, the ball breaks into the box, and for a second it looks like the equalizer is on. Then Yashin, the Black Spider, the man already being called the world's best, smothers it. The danger is gone. Final whistle. Soviet Union 2, United Team of Germany 1. The favorites are through, but they've been made to sweat by a team with one full international and a lot of part-timers. For the United German project, it's a reality check. Symbolically united on the score sheet, structurally still very divided. For the Soviets, it's a first step towards gold. We'll get back to that. Because hover over the date, November 24, 1956, and another absence becomes glaring. Hungary. They aren't there. 4 years earlier, in Helsinki, the mighty Magyars had destroyed the field. Puskás, Kocsis, Bostik, Tibor, the Golden Team, won the 1952 Olympic gold at a canter, then went on to reach the 1954 World Cup final. Between 1950 and 54, they lost just one competitive match. Olympic football, as a concept, belonged to them. By the mid-1950s, though, things are coming apart, on and off the pitch. After a summer of unrest, not the least after keenly watching what was going on in Poland, students in Budapest on October 23, 1956 marched in protest against Soviet domination. Within days, it has become a nationwide uprising. The government teeters. For a brief moment, it seems possibly that Hungary will break free from Moscow. Then the tanks roll in. On November 4th, Soviet troops crush the revolt. Thousands are killed. Thousands more flee west. In the middle of all this, Hungary's Football Federation decided about Melbourne. The team had entered the Olympic qualifying process, but ultimately withdrew late in August. One contemporary Hungarian review characterizes it bluntly. They, quote, did not defend the Olympic title, unquote, as the country and its football was swept up in its revolution and its aftermath. Famously, the Hungarian water polo team will still travel to Melbourne and on December 6 play the infamous Blood in the Water match against the USSR. Individual athletes compete and win medals, but the footballers, the original Olympic kings, are absent. The symbolism around Soviet Union versus Germany is already heavy. The absence of Hungary makes it feel even more like a passing of the torch, or maybe a burial of one era, and the cold birth of another. The 1956 Olympic football tournament unfolds almost exactly as the politics suggest it might. The USSR go on a steady march. They beat Indonesia 4-0 in the quarterfinals after a replay, get past Bulgaria 2-1 in the semis, and face Yugoslavia, another socialist but more independent-minded state, in the final. They win 1-0 with a second-half goal, taking their first Olympic football gold. On paper, it looks like just another tournament. In reality, it's the opening chapter of a long-running pattern. 1952, Hungary gold. 1956, Soviet Union gold. 1960, Yugoslavia gold. 1964 and 68, Hungary gold again. 72, Poland gold. 76, East Germany gold. And 1980, Czechoslovakia gold. For almost 3 decades, from Helsinki to Moscow, Olympic football is essentially an Eastern Bloc benefit. The pros of Brazil, Argentina, Italy, England, West Germany, and so on are locked out. The amateur stand-ins can't compete with players who are, in effect, salaried professionals with a different job title. By the time FIFA and the IOC finally relaxed their rules, allowing full professionals in 1984, then introducing an under-23 format with overage players from 1992 onwards, the era that began in Melbourne is already fading. But that night, in 1956, under the lights at Olympic Park, you can see its outline. A Soviet team built in a state sporting machine, a unified opponent still arguing with itself, and an absent champion whose country has just been flooded with tanks. That's all for episode 24 of OTD, the day that the Soviet Union began an Olympic run in Melbourne, as a post-united German team bowed out after one game, and Olympic football stepped firmly into the Cold War. If you got memories, sources, or favorite stories from Melbourne 56 and the Olympic Games, email us at otd@17lawsguide.com. Subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so more Olympic history nerds can find us. Tomorrow, November 25, we go back to the Low Countries and crank the scoreline up to chaos. The 1951 Derby de Lage between Belgium and the Netherlands, a 7-6 thriller that looks more like a pinball machine than an international match. How did it get that wild? Who kept scoring? And what did it mean for a rivalry between neighbors who know each other almost too well? Don't miss it.